When fake HOA enforcers ran over Mike Bennett's 6-year-old daughter, it shattered the peace of their quiet town. Led by a disgraced ex-Marine named Karen Jackson, these imposters terrorized families under the guise of false authority. But Mike, a veteran and a father, had a plan that would turn their reign of fear upside down. And you won't believe how this battle for justice ended with a powerful twist that proved some lines should never be crossed. In the quiet suburban streets of Willow Creek, life moved at a pace that felt almost untouched by the chaos of the world beyond. Kids played hopscotch on the sidewalks, neighbors waved from their porches, and weekends meant backyard barbecues and slow, easy mornings. It was the kind of neighborhood where people left their doors unlocked without a second thought. Safety was never a question, until that day. Mike Bennett, a retired Army Ranger with salt and pepper hair and a gaze that had once scanned foreign battlefields, had finally come home for good. After years of deployments and missed birthdays, he was determined to rebuild the life he'd put on pause. His biggest joy now was watching his 6-year-old daughter Lily, who had just learned to ride her first real bike, a bright pink one with tassels fluttering from the handlebars, a birthday present she hadn't stopped talking about. That afternoon, the golden sun painted the streets of Willow Creek in warm hues. Mike stood at the kitchen window, a steaming mug of coffee in his hands, watching Lily wobble and laugh as she pedaled up and down the driveway. Her helmet was slightly too big, sliding down over her brow every few seconds, but her determination was endless. Every shaky turn of the wheels brought a grin to Mike's face, the kind of rare, peaceful smile that only comes after knowing what real fear feels like. Inside, the house smelled of fresh-baked cookies. The television murmured softly in the background, reporting some distant story that had nothing to do with their little world. Mike allowed himself to breathe, truly breathe, for the first time in what felt like years. Then, without warning, the air split open. It wasn't just a noise. It was a sound that tore through the calm, rattling the windows and setting every instinct Mike had on high alert. Tires screeched against pavement. Somewhere, a dog barked frantically. Mike's coffee mug crashed to the floor, forgotten, as he sprinted for the front door. Down the street, a black pickup truck roared into view, a battered beast of a vehicle, its doors slapped with hastily printed HOA enforcement decals. Flashing red and blue lights bolted crookedly onto the roof. 2 figures leaned out of the windows, barking orders through a crackling megaphone, their voices distorted, sharp, slicing through the stunned silence of the neighborhood. Unauthorized parking. Immediate compliance required. Move off the sidewalks. The truck didn't slow. It didn't even hesitate. Instead, it veered violently onto the curb, its tires bouncing over the concrete as if it were nothing. Lily, halfway across the driveway, froze like a deer caught in headlights. Her little legs struggled to push the pedals faster, her bike wobbling under the sudden rush of fear. Mike's heart dropped into his stomach. He was already moving, sprinting, lungs burning, shouting her name. But he was too far, too late. The black truck hurtled forward, and in a heartbeat, everything shattered. The front bumper clipped the back of Lily's bike, sending it spinning out from under her. Mike saw it all in slow motion. Her small body tossed sideways, her legs sprawled directly into the truck's path. With a sickening crunch, the wheels rolled over her, a brutal, heart-stopping moment that seemed to hang in the air forever. Mike reached her side just as the truck skidded to a sloppy halt several yards ahead, the engine rumbling like an animal ready to lunge again. Lily's small frame lay crumpled on the ground, her bike twisted into an unrecognizable shape beside her. Her helmet had flown off, landing in the grass, and her tiny legs, the same ones that had been kicking with joy just minutes earlier, now lay motionless, unnaturally twisted in ways no body should bend. Mike dropped to his knees, gathering her trembling body into his arms, his vision blurring with a fury and terror so fierce it felt like the world had tilted off its axis. Behind him, the fake HOA enforcers shouted more orders, their megaphones still blaring, as if they hadn't just broken a child's body and shattered a family's world. And in that moment, as Mike pressed his hand against his daughter's chest to feel her heartbeat, something inside him, something forged in battlefields oceans away, reawakened. this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Shock rippled through the quiet streets of Willow Creek like an earthquake no one had seen coming. Neighbors who had been watering their lawns or chatting on porches stood frozen, their garden hoses dropping from limp fingers, words dying in their throats. Someone let out a scream, high and raw. Someone else fell to their knees on the sidewalk, hands clutching their head in disbelief. Time itself seemed to stutter. At the center of it all lay Lily, her small body too still, sprawled across the cracked pavement. Her legs, the same legs that had been pedaling her pink bicycle just moments before, now bent at angles that defied nature. The black pickup didn't stop immediately. Instead, it lumbered forward another 20 yards, as if indifferent to the devastation left in its wake. Only then did it screech to a heavy, reluctant halt, its tires grinding against the road. The engine coughed and rumbled, a menacing sound that gnawed at the silence. Two figures leaped out of the truck, moving not with the urgency of rescuers, but with the aggression of people on a mission. Both wore mismatched uniforms, tactical vests thrown over plain clothes, cheap badges pinned crookedly to their chests. In their hands they carried firearms, held high like declarations of authority they hadn't earned. One barked into a battered megaphone, her voice cracking through the stunned crowd. Everyone inside now. Public disturbance violation. The words were absurd, out of place, insult layered over horror. Mike knelt beside Lily, cradling her broken body with trembling hands. He could barely process the scene unfolding around him. The shouts, the weapons, the neighbors stumbling backward, the surreal sight of these fake enforcers treating a child's suffering as little more than an inconvenience. His heart thundered against his ribs, each beat screaming a demand for action. But his hands, the same hands once trained for silent missions across enemy lines, now trembled helplessly. There were no battle plans here, no clear objectives, only the agonizing truth that he couldn't rewind the last 60 seconds, couldn't shield his daughter from what had already been done. The fake officers pushed forward, shoving their way past stunned residents who dared to linger too long. Their faces were cold, almost mechanical, as they corralled mothers, fathers, teenagers, anyone who bore witness to their cruelty, back into their homes. There was no compassion, no hesitation, only the desperate need to maintain control over a situation spiraling far beyond their grasp. Mike barely noticed them anymore. His entire world had narrowed to the child in his arms. He brushed a trembling hand across Lily's forehead, whispering her name over and over as if the sound alone could pull her back to him. Tears blurred his vision, but they didn't fall. A deeper force took root inside him instead, something darker, heavier. It was not sorrow. It was not fear. It was rage. Pure, searing rage. A fire lit in the depths of his chest. A familiar burn he hadn't felt since the fiercest battles overseas. Except this time, the enemy wasn't a distant threat hidden behind concrete walls or desert sands. This enemy had a face, had names, and they were right here, barking orders and waving weapons over his broken child. Mike's muscles coiled like springs, every instinct honed from years of survival screaming for release. But logic, that stubborn fragment of training, held him back. For now, this wasn't a battlefield where brute force would solve everything. This was his home. His daughter needed him steady still. One truth seared itself into Mike's mind with crystal clarity. This would not be forgotten. It would not be forgiven. And it would not go unanswered. As the fake officers moved further down the block, yelling at more stunned families, Mike gathered Lily closer, shielding her from their sight. He knew, deep down, that the system they were supposed to trust might fail them, that justice, if left to its own devices, might never come. But Mike Bennett had not survived battlefields to bow his head now. A storm was building inside him, a storm that would not rest until the people who did this paid for every inch of pain they had caused. This was no longer just about what happened to Lily. It was about every neighbor silenced, every child terrified, every ounce of peace stolen by cowards hiding behind fake authority. And Mike Bennett. He wasn't about to let that stand. The wail of sirens finally cut through the heavy stillness of the neighborhood, arriving not like a savior but more like a grim reminder of how long 8 minutes could truly feel. 8 minutes. an eternity when your child lay broken on the asphalt. By the time the patrol car rolled lazily onto the street, Mike had already done what his instincts demanded. He had taken photographs of everything: the fake badges poorly pinned to the vests, the battered black pickup, its license plates barely clinging on, and most importantly, the faces. The smirking, careless faces of the people who had turned his daughter's laughter into screams. He had gathered every shred of evidence he could, his hands steady despite the earthquake inside his chest. If the law was coming, he wanted to believe it would deliver justice. He wanted to believe it still meant something. The cruiser door creaked open, and a uniformed officer stepped out, adjusting his belt with a casualness that immediately scraped across Mike's raw nerves. No urgency, no rush to check on the injured child, just a bored flick of his sunglasses up onto his forehead as he sauntered over. Mike rose to meet him, his body coiled tight, every inch of him screaming for action. He thrust the phone forward, displaying the damning photos. These people, they're not real enforcement. They ran over my daughter. She's critical. You need to arrest them now. The officer barely glanced at the screen. He gave a half-hearted shrug, as if Mike had just complained about a noise violation or an overgrown hedge. Sounds like an HOA dispute, the officer said, his voice flat. Out of our hands. Civil matter. You'll have to take it up with the association or the courts. Mike stared at him, the words hitting harder than any physical blow. Civil matter. Lily was fighting for her life, and they were calling it a paperwork problem. His hands curled into fists so tight that the skin across his knuckles turned ghostly white. A muscle twitched along his jaw. He could feel the rage rising, a tidal wave pressing against the last barriers of his discipline. But he said nothing. Not yet. Not here. Because in that moment, as he watched the officer casually turn away, the bitter truth crystallized with brutal clarity. No one was coming to help them. No badge, no system, no promise of justice was strong enough to stand against laziness, bureaucracy, and cowardice. Mike was on his own. Behind him, the paramedics loaded Lily into the back of the ambulance, the flashing red lights painting her pale face in harsh, flickering shades, her small body swallowed by two large straps and medical equipment. One of the EMTs caught Mike's eye as they closed the doors, a tight nod, grim and professional. It said what words couldn't. She was alive, but barely. The ambulance peeled away, sirens howling once more as it raced toward Willow Creek General Hospital. Mike stood in the street long after it disappeared from view, the taste of metal sharp on his tongue, the roar of his heartbeat drowning out everything else. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stood there, staring down the empty road as a valve stitched itself into the fibers of his soul. He would find them. He would make them answer, and he would stop them, no matter the cost. This wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even justice, at least not the kind you could file a complaint for and wait patiently to receive. This was something older, something deeper. A father's oath, carved in pain and tempered in fury. The fake officers had stolen the one thing Mike Bennett had sworn to protect above all else. Now they had something of his, and he would not rest until he took everything back. By sunrise, Mike Bennett was no longer the helpless father standing frozen in the street. He was a man with a mission, and missions were something Mike understood better than almost anything else. The first step was simple: find the truth. Because truth was a weapon more powerful than any bullet when wielded correctly. In the pre-dawn stillness, while the town of Willow Creek still clung to the illusion of peace, Mike made the calls he had sworn he would never need again. One to Marcus Reeves, a former intelligence analyst with a memory like a steel trap and a knack for digging into places others wouldn't dare touch. Another to Elise Spark Thompson, a genius with databases and encrypted records, once the quiet shadow behind countless classified operations. They didn't ask many questions. Old bonds ran deeper than blood. When Mike said he needed information, they answered. Within hours, the pieces began to fall into place, and the picture they formed was uglier than Mike had imagined. There was no official HOA enforcement agency operating in Willow Creek, no sanctioned patrols, no legal authority behind the people who had paraded around the neighborhood like petty tyrants. Instead, Marcus's search uncovered a crude but chilling reality. The so-called officers were a patchwork gang stitched together from disgraced former residents, men and women who had defaulted on HOA dues, lost property disputes, or simply been kicked out for causing trouble. Rather than disappear quietly, they had banded together in anger and greed, creating a rogue force under the flimsiest veil of authority. They wore second-hand tactical vests, used imitation badges bought online, and slapped cheap magnetic decals onto whatever battered trucks they could find. Their business model was simple: intimidation. They issued fake citations for made-up violations, grasped too long, wrong trash bins, parking at the wrong angle, and demanded immediate fines under threat of more aggressive consequences. If residents protested, they ramped up the fear tactics, threats, harassment, even minor acts of property vandalism to encourage compliance. All the while, the real HOA board, paralyzed by fear of scandal and lawsuits, turned a blind eye. As long as the neighborhood appeared orderly from the outside, no one dared stir the pot. But now, with Lily lying in a hospital bed, the lie could no longer be ignored. Sparks sent Mike a series of grainy photos pulled from neighborhood security cameras and old HOA meeting records. Faces emerged, rough, angry, bitter faces. People who had found a way to turn their grievances into power over others. People who had let that power warp them into something monstrous. Mike's eyes locked onto one photo, and for a moment, everything else faded. Karen Jackson. The name hit him like a fist to the chest. Karen had been his sister in arms once. Another ranger, another soldier who had sworn the same sacred oaths. They had trained together, bled together. Mike had trusted Karen to watch his back in places where mistakes meant death. And now Karen was here, in Willow Creek, hiding behind a stolen title, terrorizing innocent families, running down children without a second thought. The betrayal twisted something deep inside Mike's gut. It wasn't just the crime that burned. It was the fall. The knowledge that a woman who once stood for honor and brotherhood had sunk so low. Mike stared at Karen's face, memorizing every hard line and cruel smirk. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Karen Jackson had made a choice, and Mike would make his own. No court summons. No polite cease and desist. There were lines you didn't cross. Karen had sprinted past them. Mike sat back in his chair, the first light of morning casting long shadows across the floor. His hands were steady now. His mind was clear. He didn't know yet exactly how it would end, only that it would end. Because some debts demanded to be paid in full, Mike Bennett didn't call the police. He didn't file a report or schedule a meeting with a lawyer. Some battles couldn't be won with paperwork. Some battles had to be faced head-on. He dressed simply that morning: jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a weathered baseball cap pulled low over his brow. No insignias, no medals. Just a man stripped down to what mattered most. He slid into his old pickup truck, a quiet beast compared to the chaos roaring inside his chest, and drove out before the sun had fully burned away the mist clinging to the fields. It didn't take long to find them. The abandoned supermarket on the edge of town had long since been forgotten, its windows boarded up, its parking lot cracked and sprouting weeds. The perfect place for people who wanted to act like kings without prying eyes. And there it was, the black pickup, its crooked decals now barely visible under a fresh coat of dust and grime, parked as arrogantly as ever, like a trophy on display. Mike pulled his truck in close, the tires crunching over broken glass and gravel. He cut the engine, the silence settling like a heavy blanket. Then, without hurry, he stepped out. In his right hand, he carried a baseball bat, old, scuffed, well-worn, but solid as iron. He let it hang loosely at his side, the picture of calm purpose. Across the lot, 3 figures lounged on the hood of the black truck, passing a soda can back and forth, laughing at some private joke. Karen Jackson sat in the middle, her boots propped arrogantly on the bumper, the same smirk on her face that Mike remembered from years past. Only now it was colder, meaner. They saw Mike too late. Karen straightened, a lazy grin spreading across her face. Well, well, look who decided to crawl out from behind his white picket fence, she called, voice dripping with mockery. What's the matter, Bennett? Come to file a complaint. Mike said nothing. Words were useless here. He walked forward steadily, each step measured, the bat swinging lightly with a rhythm that mirrored his heartbeat. Karen pushed off the truck, squaring her shoulders. The two others flanked her, uncertain but trying to look tough. Mike didn't slow. When he was close enough to smell the stale sweat and cheap cologne, he moved, one smooth, practiced motion, the kind of motion muscle memory made second nature. The bat came up in a clean arc. The first blow struck the hood of the pickup dead center. Metal crumpled with a hollow crunch. The second swing shattered a headlight, shards of glass exploding outward in a rain of glittering debris. The third strike punctured a tire, the rubber sighing as the truck sank onto its rims. Karen flinched backward, the bravado draining from her face like water from a punctured canteen. Hey, man, easy, one of her buddies barked, raising his hands. But it was too late for easy. Far too late. Karen lunged, fists swinging wild and fast. But Mike had danced this dance before, under far worse conditions, against enemies far more dangerous. He ducked the clumsy punch and drove his fist straight into Karen's jaw with surgical precision, a sharp, snapping impact. Not reckless but controlled. Deliberate. Karen staggered backward, hands flying to her face as she gasped in shock. Mike stood his ground, the bat still hanging loosely in one hand, calm as a gathering storm. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't flailing. He was exact, cold, determined. In that moment, he was no longer just a father seeking justice. He was the embodiment of every broken oath, every betrayed trust, every innocent life crushed under the wheels of cowardice. Karen dropped to her knees, a trickle of blood running over her upper lip. The other two froze, their courage evaporating under the weight of the silence between them. Mike's voice, when it finally came, was low and steady. You picked the wrong town. You picked the wrong family. He didn't need to say more. The message was clear, final. The bat swung down once more, not at the people, but at the truck. Another crumpling crash echoed across the empty lot, a warning written in twisted steel. And then Mike turned and walked away, leaving the wreckage behind him, his steps sure and unwavering. He wasn't finished. Not yet. This was only the beginning. They tried to fight back. Words spilled from their mouths. Threats about lawsuits. Accusations that Mike was assaulting officers. Desperate cries to reclaim some shred of authority they never truly had. But Mike Bennett, seasoned by years of real battles, knew how to end a confrontation fast. 15 seconds. That was all it took. 2 precise moves. 2 bodies crumpled on the cracked asphalt, groaning and clutching at bruised ribs and shattered pride. Karen lay sprawled nearest, gasping through a bloody mouth, too stunned to even curse. Mike stood over them, his chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. You wanted to play cops, he growled, voice like gravel dragged across stone. Fine, let's play, but by my rules now. Calmly, efficiently, he stripped Karen's belt and used it to bind her wrists behind her back. The second and third followed quickly, wrists cinched tight, faces pressed to the dirty ground. Mike snapped a few pictures, not out of cruelty but out of strategy. A message, a warning, anonymous, straight to the local news. The photos spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. By noon, they were everywhere, buzzing on local social media pages, flashing across news bulletins, even pinned on neighborhood bulletin boards. The images were impossible to ignore. 3 figures, hog-tied and humiliated, sprawled on the cracked asphalt beside their battered truck. And more importantly, they showed the truth that the so-called enforcers were nothing but imposters playing dress-up with real lives on the line. Reporters, sensing the scent of something bigger than a simple neighborhood scuffle, began to dig deeper. What they uncovered shocked even the most jaded residents. Dozens of testimonies came pouring in. Stories of fake citations handed out like candy. Threats of escalating fines if families didn't pay cash on the spot. Vandalized property. Families, even ones with small children, harassed late into the night with threats of eviction from homes they legally owned. And behind it all, the same faces. Karen Jackson and her crew. Faces now plastered across every screen in town. Under the mounting pressure, The real police could no longer sit idle. Whatever informal arrangements or blind eyes might have existed before crumbled under the sheer weight of public outrage. The system had been forced to wake up. Less than 24 hours after the photos surfaced, all three were arrested. The charges were swift and serious: criminal impersonation, assault, coercion, conspiracy, and most devastating of all, endangerment of a child. Willow Creek's courthouse, usually sleepy and forgotten, buzzed with reporters and locals eager to see justice unfold. The handcuffs clicked closed around Karen's wrists without ceremony. There were no last-minute speeches, no grand protests, just the cold efficiency of the law finally catching up. And through it all, Mike Bennett stayed silent. He didn't attend the arrest. He didn't need to. He had already done his part. A few days later, as he visited Lily in her hospital room, something happened that struck deeper than any headline or victory march could. Lily lay propped up by a mountain of pillows, her tiny legs encased in heavy white casts. Stuffed animals lined the windowsill, get-well cards taped to the walls. Machines beeped softly in the background, a mechanical reminder of the long road ahead. But when Mike walked in, she lit up, her whole face transformed, breaking into a radiant, gap-toothed smile that pushed aside the pain and fear still shadowing the room. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered, her voice small but sure. Mike crossed the room in 2 strides, sinking carefully onto the edge of her bed. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and smiled back, a real smile, full of warmth and pride. She didn't ask about what had happened. She didn't need to, because somehow, even at 6 years old, she knew her father had kept his promise, that he would always protect her, no matter the cost. And in that moment, looking into his daughter's shining eyes, Mike Bennett knew one thing for certain. He hadn't just fought for Lily's safety. He had fought for the soul of their home, and he had won. In the courthouse, the walls seemed to hum with tension as the trial unfolded. Karen Jackson sat stiffly at the defendant's table, her once arrogant posture diminished to a slumped, hollow shell. Beside her, her 2 accomplices stared blankly at the floor, their bravado long since evaporated. When it came time for Karen to speak, she clung to the only defense she could muster. She claimed she had only been trying to maintain order, that her actions were misunderstood, that she had never intended for anyone to get hurt. But words were powerless against the mountain of evidence stacked against her. Security camera footage from nearby homes showed everything: the reckless driving, the fake uniforms, the aggressive confrontations. Photographs captured the falsified tickets, the damaged properties, and the battered faces of the enforcers after Mike had confronted them. Neighbors lined up to testify, one after another, painting a damning picture of fear, harassment, and lawlessness. And then there were the medical reports. Lily's injuries spoke louder than anything Karen could say. 2 broken legs, torn ligaments, scars that would take years to fade, if ever. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered the verdict. There was no dramatic outburst, no last-minute confession, just the firm, measured tone of justice finally catching up. Karen Jackson was sentenced to 15 years in state prison. Her accomplices received 10 years each. There would be no easy way out, no backroom deals, no second chances. As the gavel fell, Mike sat quietly in the back row, his hands folded, his expression calm. He didn't smile. This wasn't a victory to celebrate. It was simply a necessary end. Days later, when Lily was finally discharged from the hospital, the sun was shining bright against the rooftops of Willow Creek, as if the town itself was trying to heal. Mike carried her carefully down the steps, her small frame light against his strength. The paint casts on her legs were heavy, but her spirit was anything but. She clutched a stuffed bear in one arm and grinned up at him, a silent thank you shining in her eyes. They made their way slowly toward the truck, every step a small triumph, and as Mike helped Lily into her seat, securing the belts gently around her, he realized something profound. Sometimes, the wars you fight aren't on distant shores against enemies with foreign flags. Sometimes they find you at home, on quiet streets, behind familiar faces. But the fight was the same: protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, standing between darkness and the ones you love. As he closed the door and circled to the driver's side, A deep sense of peace settled over him. Not relief, not revenge, just peace. He had done what he promised. He had defended his daughter, his home, and everything he believed in. And in doing so, he had reminded an entire town that real courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it just looks like a father standing tall when the world tries to push him down. Mike started the engine, the hum of it steady and strong beneath his hands. Lily giggled softly beside him, tapping the bear's nose against the window as they pulled out of the hospital parking lot and turned toward home. Mike glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, not to look for danger, but to leave behind the shadows that had tried and failed to break them. The future stretched out ahead, wide and open, a road waiting to be traveled, and this time they would travel it together, stronger, wiser, and unafraid.